Hello, everyone. We'll wait a minute or so to see if other people are able to join us, but I thank you all for being here this evening. Hot day. So I hope this is going to be very worthwhile for all of you, worth your time. I know you've got a lot of things you could be doing on a Tuesday evening. Yeah, the number of people who are joining is growing somewhat rapidly, so it's just another. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I hope you will find this worth your time. This webinar is being presented jointly by the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis and also the Living Insights Center, which is, as many of you know, a universal religious and spiritual center that I founded in 2001 and run to this day. This is my first webinar, so please forgive any glitches. And a number of people have asked whether this is going to be recorded. And yes, it is, and we'll let you know when that's posted. As it's a webinar, you will only see me this evening. And any questions, I'll try to take questions at the answer time permitting. We have a lot of ground to cover. But any questions should be put in the Q&A rather than in chat. And I'll try to check that at the end. Anything put in there between now and the end, I probably won't see. So my apologies. So I went on a pilgrimage in India. The word for pilgrimage in Sanskrit is yatra. The entire pilgrimage was in Tamil Nadu, which is the state at the southern tip of India. Many Hindus worship the one and only God. We believe there's only one God, but we believe that God takes many different forms, and many worship God through one of its particular forms, one of its particular embodiments, that being Shiva, and I am one of those. So my pilgrimage was entirely devoted to Shiva temples and other Shiva sites. I was there for about 16, 17 days, and it was definitely life-changing and quite illuminating about India and how worship takes place in that country. My goals for this evening, first of all, I'm going to present some basics of Hinduism for those of you who are new to it. I'm sure there are some, and hopefully some interesting details for my fellow Hindus. I hope there are some. I apologize in advance to my Indian friends if I get anything wrong. This was my first trip to India, and I went with Westerners' eyes. You will see some of the most sacred temples and sites in all of India, not just southern India. I'll present many photos and my perceptions about life in India. Most of the photos are in the last 2/3 of the program, so you're going to hear a lot of text for a bit in the beginning, but that's to present the religious and cultural context for what you'll be seeing. And I do hope you're going to feel like you went with me. So just to place India for you, a lot of people seem to think it's in the southern hemisphere. It is not. It is just north of the equator. This blue dot that you see in the picture on the left is Tamil Nadu. You can see that in the map on the right. So it is the southern tip of India, the part that is closest to the equator. And as you can see, it's very close to Southeast Asia, which I think people don't necessarily realize. Tamil Nadu is slightly smaller than New York. It's 2/3 the size of Missouri. It is 1/3 the size of California. And it has 81.5 million people, which is more than all 3 states put together. New York State has 20 million, Missouri 6, and California 40. So notwithstanding that, it doesn't feel congested, but there are a lot of people there. And there are 39,000 temples to support them. That's a government figure. The overall literacy rate in Tamil Nadu is 83%, more for males than females, and those figures are all a bit higher than for India as a whole. The tour I went on was led by Christopher Wallace, who is known as Harish. There he is. He's an internationally known Shaiva Tantra scholar, teacher, author, and practitioner. He's got followers all around the world. He is American, but lives in Portugal. And he is the source of much of the information that I'll be presenting, and he's an excellent teacher. The tour included 34 yatris, or pilgrims, plus Harish and the staff, and they were from all around. We had a lot of people from the US, but we had people from the United Kingdom, Ireland, Australia, France, Cyprus, Japan, South Africa, and Austria. The age bracket was quite broad, 30 to 75. Not all of them were students of Harish. Very few were pure devotees of Shiva devotees, because Tantra emphasizes Shakti, the divine feminine aspect of God, as much as the male aspect. It's Shiva oriented, but also with goddess elements as well. We had to dress in traditional clothing for one temple. So here's a photograph of our group. And I'm kind of back there in the middle. I don't care if I show up in pictures. We had as much access as anyone really could to the temple's inner sanctums, and in some cases, rare access to Harish. And we had an Indian tour guide who spoke the language and could really make things happen. There is a new Tamil Nadu law that prohibits not just cameras, but also phones, because they have cameras in all temples, but that's not widely enforced. Even so, some of the temples do ban them. So in some cases, you're going to see stock photos rather than my own photos. But we were granted some really unexpected photo access in some of the temples. At the end of the tour, I took 2 days to go on my own on an excursion to a very well-known ashram, which has 2 really special Shiva shrines. You're going to see pictures. We saw no other Western tours, even though this is the best time to go to this part of India. We hardly saw any Westerners at all. Apparently few go where we went. About 30% of Indians speak some English, and that's especially in the government and hotels. But fortunately, we had an Indian translator, so we were able to get by better than if we had gone just on our own, I think. We were welcomed. Many were excited by our presence, especially the kids. Indians seem to love having their pictures taken with us. And we were told that's because they feel that our abundance might wear off on them, but also that some might feel that at least some of the people in our group are movie stars. Now, India has a huge movie industry, much larger than that we have in the United States, but I'm kind of skeptical that that really was a factor. Here's a couple of pictures of, well, here you see students waving to us in our bus, and wherever we went, quite frequently, people, especially women, it seemed, would gather around us. Our tour did have some limitations. India is very diverse. We only saw one state. You're going to hear about differences, in particular between North and South India. We were on foot a great deal, so we were immersed in a lot of ways, but also we were insulated because we were traveling in a large air-conditioned bus, and we stayed in nice hotels or resorts. I never went into anyone's home, so I don't know what those were like. So I feel my views are informed, but I recognize they're also limited. When we went, it was particularly crowded, as we were there during 2 huge annual yatras, pilgrimages, which I'll describe later, and also at a time when there were some other major festivals. We were there in winter, but because it's so near to the equator, the temperatures were in the 80s every day. This is the best time to go to southern India. And India is almost, where we were is almost exactly 180 degrees on the other side of the planet. It is 11 and a half hours ahead of us. India is large enough to have 2 time zones, but they decided to go with 1 and split the difference. So there was a lot of jet lag. Some observations now about India in general. It is challenging for people from our country, but it is certainly, I think, less so than we usually hear. To be sure, there is deep poverty everywhere. But before I went, I was told, are you going to have beggars all over you? And that simply wasn't the case. I saw a fair number of beggars, but they were not, persistent. They didn't invade my space. It was pretty similar to the panhandlers here in the United States. There are a lot of people, 4 times as many people as in the United States, in 40% of the size of the lower 48. India surpassed China in population this year. So the cities are very crowded. They're very active. It's kind of like being in a beehive with constant noise. But once you get outside of the cities, there's a lot of rural space. It's not like there's people just everywhere. The stereotype about urban roads being like Star Wars battles in space, that's totally true. Lanes are pretty much optional, I would say. I saw only maybe 6 stoplights the entire time I was in India, and no stop signs as we would know them. So, people trying to merge and go across roads and they make it work. I didn't see a single accident. There is a lot of litter. One reason is historically, traditionally, Indians have thrown things away that would decompose, and they have not done a great job as yet of educating Indians that plastic doesn't decompose that way. So the governments are working on that. Hygiene is better than we hear. I heard all kinds of horror stories about what I would experience there, and it simply wasn't the case. I saw no more public relieving, if you will, than here. There were always toilets and toilet paper everywhere we went. Nobody got sick. We all did try to drink bottled water or filtered water, but it wasn't really a dangerous place to be, I think. The urban streets typically were mostly very small open air shops or tables, and it seemed an awful lot of them were selling the same things: vegetables, flowers, and water. Some with religious items, but not as many as I expected. Very colorful, countless signs. A lot of people, I suspect, live above or behind their stalls. Most of the buildings appeared to be plaster or stucco painted and over brick or concrete. So here are some typical road scenes. They do drive on the left side of the road. Again, it's very crowded, a lot of motorcycles, a lot of bicycles. In a lot of streets, you have to walk down the street because the sidewalks are covered with people, with the shops and tables. And you have to deal with motorcycles coming up behind you or sometimes in front of you. Again, typically fruit, flowers, and the like. Again, very colorful. Very common scene. Again, bicycles are pretty common, but I think probably not quite as typical from what I've seen as motorcycles. Some more general observations: electricity and cell phones are widespread. Air conditioning, as far as I can tell, was rare outside of the hotels. I saw maybe 5 satellite dishes. Of course, hotels would have not a problem with that. We were told it'd be easy to find ATMs. That was not the case. Taxis are everywhere. They call them auto rickshaws, or some people call them tuk-tuks, and they're not like our taxis. You'll see some pictures, and again, motorcycles. Cows and dogs are everywhere, and they're generally ignored. It's not like people are going up and worshiping cows. They just sort of wander around, dogs and cows, pretty much in the same way. Kind of thought I'd see more elephants. I only saw 2, and both were in religious settings. I had heard that Tamil Nadu has factories, but I don't recall seeing any. And people, often ask, are Indians all vegetarian? They are not. I'm pretty sure no Indians, no Hindus will eat beef or pork, but some will eat fish, for example, or maybe fowl. Most of the women wear saris. Men tended to wear regular Western shirts and maybe pants and maybe some other kinds of Indian clothing. Most of the highways are 2-lane, very rough, few 4-lane roads. Most of the land I saw was flat. A lot of fields, rice paddies. There are some small, they would call them mountains, a few that look like mountains, sort of like maybe the size of the Smokies, that kind of mountains. Certainly nothing with snow-covered peaks. Most of the trees were deciduous, despite being so close to the equator, but there were palm trees. And in some, the Indians, I felt, were very successfully living their lives. They seem every bit as happy as we are, maybe even more. And I admire them. I felt very comfortable there, again, very welcomed. Now, again, I had mentioned earlier, North and South India are different, and this is a big cultural difference, I think, important for people who might be traveling to India to know about. India was originally populated by Dravidians. Then about 4,000 years ago, and there are discussions about whether these timelines are accurate, and, but this is kind of a general understanding I hope is accurate enough. About 4,000 years ago, Indo-European Aryans came in from the northwest and they settled northern India. They brought Sanskrit, they wrote the Vedas, they had the caste system, and they established classical Vedic Hinduism. And the Dravidians then tended to congregate in the south. By 500 in the Common Era, the Vedic culture had kind of permeated throughout southern India, but the Dravidian culture continued, and in fact, in many ways, their deities became the dominant ones that are still worshipped. They have a classical religion that is largely still intact, and there are some strains between the Aryan and Dravidian people and their regions. Their languages are in very different linguistic families. In fact, the Indian Constitution officially recognizes 22 languages, but there are many, many more. Some count thousands. And India has always been a number of diverse states, with each of the states or kingdoms having their own, not just languages, but customs, food, clothing, that sort of thing. Northern India also was impacted greatly by invasions from Islam. They devastated, literally, northern India for centuries. There was a period of 500 years where Buddhism actually was the dominant religion in India, but Islam destroyed it. Many of the temples were destroyed, destroyed, and rebuilt in the north. But this damage only affected southern India for maybe about 60 years, at least in Tamil Nadu. So much of the classical culture and the old temples remain intact there. And the northern architecture is different because it was different to begin with, but also the Indians decided if they made them look more like mosques, they'd be less likely to be destroyed. Now, religion. India is extremely religious. As I noted, there are 39,000 temples in Tamil Nadu. And in much of rural Tamil Nadu, you can't go for a mile without seeing a shrine or a temple somewhere. And this statement, I'm going to read this. This is a very common statement about the character of Tamil Nadu. I've seen this kind of statement many times. In Tamil Nadu, and it's, I think, applicable to India to a large extent as well in general. In Tamil Nadu, mystic beliefs and Hinduism are closely intertwined with everyday life and traditions. Religion is incorporated as a way of life, a mode of thought that through centuries has become second nature. The tremendous faith and devotion of the Indian people is one of their most distinguishing features. And I felt that. Now, even so, India's constitution declares India to be a secular nation, meaning separation of church and state and freedom of religion, as we know those terms. But despite this, most of the temples in Tamil Nadu are actually run by the government. And the government wants the money, and priests are very poorly paid. And this is a carryover from British rule. It's a source of tensions and political battling. And it's especially a problem in Tamil Nadu and other states in southern India. Now, Hinduism dates back, well, some people say 3,500 years, many say 5,000 or maybe 8,000 years, but there was a reform era extending about 800 years in the millennium prior to Christ that changed the religion greatly. That's when Buddhism and Jainism spun off of Hinduism. Westerners often believe that Hinduism is polytheistic, but it's not. As I mentioned, it's monotheistic, or maybe many people would say panentheistic, meaning there's only one God, but it takes many forms. The ultimate God, Brahman, transcends the universe and also creates, sustains, and recreates constantly the universe within itself, which means everything we experience is within God. God isn't separate from this universe. And again, Brahman takes many forms, and those are the ones that are worshipped in temples, and each embodies different aspects of God. We can perceive Brahman, which is ultimately indescribable, as an ocean of consciousness, continually creating vibrations within itself that take its own consciousness and brings it into patterns, into forms, and that's the universe. And the consciousness is considered male and is perceived as male deity forms. The vibrations, the energies, considered female and is worshipped in female forms. And those are often the spouses of the male form. So Shiva has spouses, for example. The female aspect of reality is known as Shakti, and you only have the totality if you have both. Now, Shiva is one of the primary male forms. His consort has various forms, one of whom you will hear about is Parvati. And in his greatest form, though, Shiva is perceived as both male and female combined. The deity forms change over time, the ones that are worshipped. For example, one you may have heard of, Ganesha, the deity with the elephant head, has been and is a very popular deity now, but wasn't a deity until about 1,500 years ago. And Shiva and Vishnu devotions, Vishnu being another of the primary deity forms, those were actually separate religions until about 900 years ago or so. Well, 8 or 9. The main deity form worshipped in Tamil Nadu, other than Shiva Shakti, is a deity known as Murugan, the second child of Shiva and Parvati. He's a warrior. He helps master awakening in people, and he's known by other names such as Kartikeya. And Parvati is worshipped in one particular temple, and only one, is in a form known as Meenakshi. We visited that temple, and I had an amazing experience there, which I'll mention later. Now, Shiva is typically worshipped not in the form of a statue that looks like a human being, but rather in the form of a conjoined lingam or linga. Maybe you've seen them, stones that kind of shaped like a football often, and a yoni, which is carved to resemble female anatomy. And this represents the consciousness, male, and energy, female aspects of reality combining into one. So what we perceive as dual is one. And this imagery may, in fact, have originally been phallic fertility imagery, but it's no longer perceived that way. Hindus take offense when it's described that way. Most temples' lingams are carved of black granite, and you'll see in a moment a photograph taken from our local temple's website. But there are others that come from a particular river in India called the Narmada River, and those are considered very sacred. Most statues do not become sacred unless they're consecrated and reconsecrated, re-energized every week through rituals, which we call pujas. But the stones that come from the Narmada River are considered to be sacred, always consecrated by Shiva, so you don't need to re-energize them. And Living Insights for about a decade has been working to bring one of the largest that will be in the United States. So that's it on the right, and on the left is the Shiva Lingam that we have at our Hindu temple. The Lingam and Yoni on the right are currently in the parking lot at Living Insights awaiting installation. Early temples were wood or mud. Stone temples followed. Some of the temples current structures, many of the temple's current structures may only go back, let's say, 600 years, but the temples themselves in those locations have often been going at those locations for as much as 2,000 years or maybe even more. Nearly all of the temples that we saw are very active. They are not museums, although a few are archaeological sites. A typical large temple complex is enclosed by walls. It has multiple gate towers, they're called gopurams, with large courtyards and buildings inside and tanks, which are originally for bathing. The largest temple complex in India is 160 acres with 21 gopurams, the tallest of which is 240 feet tall. We did not go to that temple because it wasn't a Shiva temple. A gopuram typically has a 2-story base of stone with brick covered by plaster above it. Some are painted, some are not. So here are two very good examples. These are both from temples that were on my yatra. So you'll see more pictures from those temples shortly. The inner sanctums, in our local temple, if you've ever been there, it's very bright, very well lit. But the inner sanctums in the temples in India are small, very dark, illuminated only by camphor flames, and only the priests are allowed in the deepest parts. Priests are all in one particular caste. They're all male. They're required to be married because their spouses and body represent Shakti. The priests conduct rituals and lead chanting. They do not give sermons. There are no pews, hardly any chairs. You sit on the floor. And for those who are familiar with our rituals, our pujas, water pujas are Aryan and fire pujas are Dravidian. The two yatras, other pilgrimages we saw, were huge. One was goddess devotees, and they were all wearing red. You'll see a lot of them. The other were devotees of a Ayappa or Ayappan, all wearing black. And at this time of year, 10 or 20 million of them go wandering around on their yatra in southern India. So we saw a lot of them. And our local temple has one of only 2 Ayappan shrine rooms in the United States and an active group. I saw fewer than 10 Christian churches, fewer than 10 mosques, I think. And persecution of non-Hindus is an issue that's drawing international attention. There are historical causes, but it is a problem. So let's go to India. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk and you would like to see pictures. So first of all, here's a map of Tamil Nadu. We started in Chennai at the top, which is the largest city, 12 million people. And we worked our way down to Rameshwaram, which is down here between India and Sri Lanka, or at the edge of the end of a promontory, essentially, that peninsula that reaches towards Sri Lanka. At the closest, you're about 15 miles from Sri Lanka. And then afterwards, I went to Coimbatore over on the west side on my 2-day extension. So Chennai is the capital. Previously was known as Madras, so Madras clothing, shirts, pants were from there. The first day I spent recuperating alone to do jet lag, which of course was a lot, and the yatra hadn't started yet. So after I rested, I checked out television, and I found about 25 stations from all over India with all their different languages and alphabets, and scrolling. And most of them were showing news, very, very active screens. 2 had soap operas. 1 had a deity reenactment. And the women in the commercials that I saw all looked like models, and most of the men actually looked like Americans. Maybe I guess these are they're models for what attractive people look like. That surprised me. I don't think that's right. Anyway, there were politicians yelling a lot, and there was a fake sadhu ascetic selling products. So here are a couple of pictures I took of the television. On the left is Brahma, not Brahman, but Brahma, the creative aspect of God. The politicians on the right were yelling at each other, and the sadhu was selling, I'm not quite sure what that product was. So in Chennai, first we visited the Chennai Ramakrishna Mutt. That's the way that's pronounced. Ramakrishna was a major figure in the 1800s. His disciple Vivekananda was a major hit at the first Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1893. There's another one later this summer. And he established various Ramakrishna organizations, which now include the Vedanta societies in the United States, one of which has been here in St. Louis since 1938. It's not headquartered in Chennai, but rather in Kolkata. You'll see a photo in a moment. Then we went to a temple, Kapaleshwara temple, dating back to the 8th century or so, though it's been renovated repeatedly. The main Gopuram there is only 120 feet tall, making it small to medium sized. So here is the Ramakrishna Mutt. The temples don't look like that, as you'll see. They look like that. So this is a typical Gopuram to enter a temple. And the gateways into the temples are all as large as what you see on the right. Here are a couple other pictures. And as you can see, the detail in the Gopurams is quite impressive, and they are, I believe, typically painted every 12 years. There's a reconsecration of temples to take place every 12 years. And I know at least in one case, they try to repaint the whole thing every 12 years, and it may take 12 years to do it. So then we hit the road. This is a typical sort of temple you would see in a town along the road. And on the right and on the right side of that first picture on the left is one of the auto rickshaws. And as you can see, it is not like our taxis. It's kind of like a motorcycle with a frame around it. They typically are made to hold 4 to 6 people. We saw some with 10 people crammed in. Here are some more typical road scenes. In the picture on the right, you see a beautifully painted small truck, and that seemed to be pretty common in India. Every small truck I saw, as I recall, really, colorfully painted. Then on the left, these two, you see one of the Christian churches that we saw, and a small temple on the right. Again, colorful. And then our next stop was in Kanchi, or it's known as Kanchipuram. The word Puram means town, so Kanchipuram is the town of Kanchi. It's a town that's 3,000 years old. It's extremely historic and holy, has had a major role in a number of kingdoms, the capital of one of them. And they're famous for making saris and sending them all around the world. To go into one of the temples, all of our women had to have saris, so they went to a sari shop. This is a picture. There were 3 large rooms, and the walls were like this throughout the entire structure. We had, I don't know, 20 or more women who needed to get saris. They were rapidly tailored and delivered the next day or two. Meanwhile, the men went to the Ekambaranathar temple, has another name as well, with 108 Shiva lingams. It's been in existence since at least 600. It's not as ornate or and it's not as well kept as some of the other temples we saw, and it's relatively small, but it was still really had a lot of presence. And there's a very famous story about Parvati having been at this location and worshiping Shiva with a lingam of sand that she repeatedly created. And it's also said that Rama, who is a primary avatar form of Vishnu, one of the other primary deities, worshipped at that same lingam. So here are a couple of pictures. Obviously, the Gopurams here are not painted. You can see some very happy Indians. This next picture, you see some of the goddess yatris. And on the right, you see some of the 108 lingams. People kind of tend to think that all the black granite ones are carved to be the same shape. There are a lot of restrictions on geometry, size, and this sort of thing. But at least in this case, there are many different versions of it. This is one long wall. There are two other long walls with like that with as many lingams as you can see. A kind of typical simple courtyard for one of these temples, a relatively small tank. Traditionally, the tanks were for people to go in and bathe, to cleanse themselves before they went into temples, but they're not used that way now. Very long hallway on the left, and on the right behind the columns, that's another one of the walls with many of the lingams. And the picture on the right depicts Parvati worshiping that lingam that I mentioned. We then visit a second temple dating back to 700. This one is not active. It's a UNESCO site. It's small and has a different kind of architecture, but historically it was believed to be really powerful. It was believed that going to this temple had the same energy for you as going around Mount Kailash in Tibet, which all Hindus consider one of the two most sacred mountains in the world. So this temple is known as Kailasha Nata. All Tibetans consider that mountain sacred as well. I don't know why this temple's fallen out of use, maybe because it's small. Our yatra did include, by the way, the other mountain. You will see that. So here is this ancient UNESCO site, and the architecture is different. Much of this we understand was painted, but the paint has worn off in most of it. And there's Harish with that's photograph, mostly our group. Then we headed to Mahabalipuram, also known as Mamallapuram, and for centuries this town has been known as having the best stone carvers in India. As we entered the town, there were numerous workshops lined up with huge carvings, often 8 feet tall. We then visited a site of monolithic unfinished temples carved in the 8th century. And these are carvings of gigantic stones, and it's very similar to our Elephant Rock State Park here in Missouri, if you're familiar with that. The stones are of that size. We then visited the shop Harish feels has the best carvers. In this case, our resort was on the beach, the Bay of Bengal. So here are some photos of we took as we made our way into the town. There's one of the auto rickshaws, a fancier one than many of them. These are these large temples. These are gigantic stones carved into what you see. And in some cases, you can see they are carved all the way in to create rooms within them. This picture on the bottom right is very similar to something you'll see if you go to Elephant Rock State Park. This is a very complex carving with a lot of story built into it. The same site from a different vantage point. And then these are the carvers. This is the shop that we went to. This carver was just sitting on the floor carving. The carving on the right, I actually ended up buying as a Shiva devotee. I couldn't resist. It's a really impressive piece. It looks larger than it is. It's maybe about 16 inches tall. This doesn't have anything to do with the carvings, but I saw this in Mahabalipuram, and this is a particularly striking image of one of the creation stories in Hinduism. That's Vishnu there creating the universe by having Brahma arise from his navel. I just thought it was a good shot. And this was the resort that we were in. Then we headed to Tiruvannamalai. And I'd been looking, this was on my bucket list before I went. When I found out this was on the tour, that kind of settled it for me. Because it has 3 sites, remarkable sites I've wanted to see for many, many years. First, there's Mount Arunachala. Mount Arunachal is the second of the two sacred mountains, the two most sacred mountains. It's actually considered to be the embodiment of Shiva and itself a lingam. And years ago, when the universe was perfect, in the most perfect era, it was actually a mountain of fire. There is a very well-known story in Hinduism involving the three main deity forms, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. And this mountain of fire was created, coalesced after, at the end of that story. And now that we are in the densest of the yugas, eras, the mountain has now become a stone mountain. We did go up on the mountain. Hindus aspire to circumambulate it. We did about 20% of that, during which we saw 50 ascetics, I think. And about 3 million people attend an annual fire festival there, which involves setting a huge fire on top of the mountain. Secondly, there is a temple that's widely considered one of the most beautiful in India. It is very impressive, but the visit wasn't as rewarding as I'd hoped, because it was incredibly crowded, largely because of these other yatras that were there. Then finally, the ashram of Ramana Maharshi is there. He is universally considered one of the most significant and awakened Hindus or beings of any religion of the 20th century. We were allowed into his burial hall and also into the two small meditation caves that he used for a total of 22 years. And this was definitely one of the energetic highlights of the entire yatra for me. Very intense Shakti. No photos were allowed inside, so you're only going to see stock photos. The hike up to the caves was really, really difficult. Some people went to the top of the mountain, but I couldn't do it at my age. So first, on the road here again, some very typical images. We didn't see that many ox carts, to be honest, but they were around. Then here's an example of the rural nature. A lot of Tamil Nadu was flatter than this, but these are the kinds of hills you will see in some areas. And many of them are very rocky. And then we were in flat area, and suddenly arising out of nowhere, it seemed, was Arunachala. And there it is. And if you look right here at the base, that's the temple. The temple, the largest Gopuram, I think, is 170 feet. I'll give you that number, confirm that in a minute. And Arunachala just towers over the city. And so wherever you go, you pretty much can see it. This is on the road to our resort, which was in the outskirts of town. This is where we stayed. It almost had a Caribbean feel in a way, with the thatched roof and the colors. So we then went to the Ramanashram. This is the entry to it. Again, we are now not allowed into it. In the picture on the right, this building on the left is the burial hall, or the beginning of the building that has the burial hall. Here's Ramana Maharshi, and on the right is the burial hall. He is buried under that structure at the end of the hall. As you can see in this particular instance, and this is the only place I saw this on the yatra, the men and the women are separated. And you're allowed to walk around, circumambulate the burial area. And the energy was really something. We then went up the mountain. This is only about maybe 20% of the way up the mountain. And you can see the temple. There were monkeys everywhere. If you're not carrying food, the monkeys don't bother you. If they think you have food, they're a real nuisance. And as you can see, the temple structure, as I said, it has a wall all the way around. It has courtyards, even a lot of trees within, a number of buildings. We went up again to the caves. This building on the right is an ashram that Ramana and his mother lived in. It's very small, just a few rooms. And at the back of one of those rooms was this cave on the left where he meditated for, I believe it was 5 years, and further up the mountain was a cave again into the mountain, the one on the right, and he was in that one for 17 years or so. Again, we were allowed into both, and the energy was something. You then come down the mountain into town. This is entering the town from the mountain, and you begin to see the temple, and that's how big it is. It is 1.5 miles or 2 miles around, which we found difficult because we had to walk it barefoot, as I'll explain in a minute, and it was extremely hot and a lot of rocks. It was challenging. So to enter, we went down to the left and into this Rajagopura on the left. And so there's the one we enter, and we went into sort of a long hallway cage sort of thing, and we're told that because of the crush of people, it's going to take us 4 hours to get into the inner sanctum. We thought we had figured out a way to bypass that and go into what's called a VIP line, but it didn't work out. So we were not able to get into the inner sanctum, which I had been looking forward to, and instead walked around the temple. And so that's where you see some of these pictures. This is the tank on the left, a number of gopurams, obviously, and they're really beautiful, really. I'll go back so you can see that a little further. The details just extraordinary. People often want to know, can you go up in the gopurams? No, you can't. They are not hollow. Then this is a picture from the festival time. This is not when we were there. They will take murtis and put them on these chariots and take them all around town. And the chariots are pulled by hundreds of people. The ropes that pull them are, at least 6 or maybe 8 inches thick. So it's a big production and quite a scene. I've seen videos. We then went on the Giravalam, which is the circumambulation. And on the left, this is part of our group. This is in the middle, a sadhu in front of one of the many, many shrines and small temples that you will find along the way. On the right, there's another of them. On the left, those are said to symbolize Vishnu's feet. They're probably 15 feet long. Again, there was a monkey family. I thought they were cute. On the upper right, you have a photograph of the entry to a space that is being created by a man who most people consider to be a charlatan. He is shamed about in India to a large extent, but trying to rehabilitate his standing. And on the right is a sign. You would see signs like this in various places, numerous places, trying to eliminate plastic litter and still combining it with sacred imagery. A couple of stock photos of the Giravalam when it is very large. Again, it was not peak time when we were there. Then we headed to Chidambaram. Chidambaram was the capital of a southern kingdom, the Chola kingdom, very famous for their metal statuary. And in Chidambaram, Kali, one of Shiva's consort forms, was originally worshipped, and then around 1250, Shiva became dominant. We did visit a Kali temple there, but it was very small. Didn't take a picture. The Shiva temple is major and particularly notable because it is the only temple in all of India where Shiva is worshipped in the Nataraja form. The dancing form you've perhaps seen with Shiva inside of a circle that represents the universe, and he's dancing and it's on fire because he sets it afire in every instant, and then he brings it back into existence in every instant. It's Brahman recreating the universe in every instant. So usually Shiva's worshipped in the lingam form again, but in this temple, no. And this temple has the original Nataraja form, Murti, anywhere. You can't take pictures there. I found no photos of it, but Here's an example. This is a Nataraja form that was donated by the Indian government for placement at the CERN Large Hadron Collider campus in Switzerland, where they collide, break up atoms. So we arrived in Chidambaram just a few days before a major festival. So there were many colored lights and huge chariots, like you saw, were being prepared to carry murtis around in a festival. We visited the temple twice, so to see evening and day photos. Hindus hope, this is a term to know, Hindus hope to experience darshan with deity forms, meaning literally seeing and being seen by them, experiencing them. So we had significant experiences. First, surprisingly, we were allowed to have intimate darshan of the Nataraja twice. We were told you might not get darshan at all, you might get very brief darshan, but we ended up having it twice, and I was only 25 feet away from the Nataraja, which I kind of took on faith. I could barely see where it was. And only the priest and a few other people were closer. Then one of our yatris, pilgrims, paid $1,250 for a very special puja in his late father's honor. This combined a fire ritual, or a homam, also known by other names, and a water puja, Rudra Abhishekam. Abhishekam means bathing, and Rudra is a name for Shiva. And because we were sponsors, we all had to dress up. That's why we got the saris. And we were given, amazingly, special approval to take photographs, except of the murtis. I don't think anybody else in the temple had their cameras or phones. So here, as we enter the temple, you walk under this canopy with all these colored lights on the left, past booth after booth, after stall, with things being sold for the temple, garlands, for example. And then there were all these Christmas lights in the form of Nataraja and other obvious appropriate images. And then you entered the temple through very colorful entry. And these were some of the structures you would see. It's an old temple. It's not quite as colorfully painted as some of the others, but still is. This is again where you entered into on the left with the lights. And on the right, that's a very large structure. And the woman who you see is looking over that wall into the tank. And behind it, so this is a stock photo, behind it is, really beautifully, depicted Gopuram there. I think this is probably a picture that was taken before the colors had faded and some of the, what we actually saw with our eyes. So maybe they're getting due for a repainting. Then here are some pictures of the puja. There were, I think, 31 priests all chanting. The left picture shows 2 priests throwing rice on some murtis. The middle picture depicts the fire puja. On the right, you see some of the other participants observing our puja. Not participants, but observers. On the left, you see a priest pouring ghee, purified butter that's melted down a trough into the fire. Again, on the right, you'll see the priests and the 2 gentlemen of ours who don't have their shirts on. They're the 2 sponsors. One's paid $1,250, the other $250. And here's our group. You saw us before we got all sweaty at the very beginning in our fancy clothes, our formal clothes. And this was after the puja had been completed. I like the picture of the man up in the back there. So then these are the chariots that were, when we went the first time, they were being constructed. And next day we returned and found that they had been completed, as you see on the right. We were not there for the festival. This is the resort that we were in. Very interesting architecture in each one of the resorts that we stayed in. Then we went to Swami Malai. Swami Malai, Chidambaram is the town famous for making the stone statues. Swami Malai is famous for making the most beautiful bronze statues in India, and has been known for that for centuries or even millennia. And we visited a workshop in which the statues are still to this day being made in the famous and ancient lost wax method, which you may have heard of, and I'll show you pictures and explain it. Our resort was particularly historic and unusual, and it was publicized internationally as being an eco resort. And it's comprised of several old villages which were combined into a resort with courtyards and a really interesting restored banking building. So here's how these statues are made. First, there are a group of people who make the statues out of wax, and that's what you see on the left. That man is applying wax, and they apply it in pretty great detail. Then when it's ready, they will encase it in a clay-like substance, which is very durable. This one in the middle, this shows the encasing, but it's around a mold, which is permanent. So this, mostly when they do this, the stuff is removed and then thrown away, but in this one it's reused. And then it is put into a very hot fire along with bronze, which is then becomes molten, and then the molten wax is allowed to leave and the bronze is poured in. It's allowed to solidify, and then they break away the encasing. And what they get is not perfect. So you need then, like here's one that came out, and as you can see, it needed a lot of cleaning up and finishing. So that's what these men in the middle are doing. This statue you see on the left is being worked on by the man in the red shirt in these other two pictures. And again, most of the lost wax statues, many of the best ones come from Swami Malai. We went to another shop as well, and here were two statues outside of their shop. The one on the left is, not counting the base, is probably 7 feet tall. The statues on the right, counting the base, probably were 8 feet tall. And actually, when we were in Chidambaram, we saw these two statues, which I'm sure were from Swami Malai. So you have a particularly elaborate Nataraja, and on the right, that's a statue of Vishnu, and that is easily 8 feet tall, I'd say. And here's the resort that we were in, and there's that very intricate bank building restored. It was demolished elsewhere and rebuilt on this location piece by piece. And looking out my window was into a courtyard, and you couldn't even see the courtyard because it was so full of these really beautiful flowers on the right. Here are 3 other pictures from the resort. On the left, you see someone meditating with a Shiva Lingam and Yoni in his heart. In the middle, you see another representation of a Shiva Lingam. And Shiva Lingams are customarily accompanied by a bull who you whisper your prayers into his ears and he takes them to Shiva, very devoted to Shiva. And there's a sign on the right indicative of the Hindu understanding that all things are sacred, all things are part of God. So don't stamp on the crawling insects, God's passing by. So then we got back on the road and we also drove around in town, and here are some additional typical road scenes. And on the left, additionally, an atypical scene, because this is a shrine to Shirdi Sai Baba of Shirdi. That's not in Tamil Nadu. I'm not sure actually where it is, but there's a shrine for him there. And then again, another typical home. And on our way to Madurai, where we were heading. Suddenly our bus was stopped because in the middle of a road in a town, and there was no other road, there was a puja taking place. And it was taking place under the structure on the left, and you can see something hanging there. That is Krishna, one of the avatar forms of Vishnu, being flown. He's being pulled by two people pulling strings above Shiva and Shakti in that altar. And the puja was supposed to end only when the string broke. And we had no idea how long that was going to be. It could have been 10 minutes, it could have been 10 hours, and there was no way around. So we got off the bus. There was an elephant who would give you blessings. You would hand it a rupee, you would take it with your trunk, and then it would tap your forehead and give you the rupee back. I think he gave the rupee back. Later on the trip, we saw the historic Kaveri River, very well known in India. Here are some pictures from that town. Not notable, but I like these pictures because in the picture on the left, you will see at the top a woman partially, and that's her picture on the right. And I was just struck with the comparison between the signs that she's standing between and her appearance. And she was watching the puja from that vantage point. This is a typical in-town small temple. Here's the street. Once it was cleared, and we were able to continue on our way. We then started to see some mountains. Again, some of them very rocky. Again, there's the Kaveri River. And then we reached Madurai, and this was a major highlight for all of us. It's a very historic town, about 2 million people. And the temple there is universally considered one of the most beautiful and important temples in all of India. It is huge, it's extremely complex. There are nearly 700,000 square feet in the temple, with about 30,000 statues and about 20,000 people per day. It has 14 gopurams. The tallest is 170 feet. I thought that was the number for Tiruvannamalai, but I don't remember how large that one was. But so again, remember the largest in India is 240 feet, but 170 feet is pretty good. I think now, as I think about the largest at Tiruvannamalai, might have been 194 feet. And again, repainted every 12 years. Amazing murtis, extremely powerful presence of the divine feminine energy. No cameras were allowed, so you will only see internet photos, but we were allowed into the inner sanctums, which was very rare, very blessed. This particular temple has been centered upon a goddess known as Meenakshi for 2,000 years. Her name means she with fish eyes, and there's several interpretations. First of all, the eyes are large in the depictions, but also a fish never closes its eyes, so it represents that the goddess is always seeing you. Meenakshi is a Shiva consort. She's been perceived in various ways over the centuries. For example, the way she was perceived was changed in 1380. When the temple was reconsecrated after having been damaged by Muslims. And she is considered a powerful, sensual, and playful form of Parvati. Again, one of the primary forms of Shiva's consort. And I had my most powerful darshan experience with her, a very deep heart opening and very strong sense of her actual presence and connection with me, which was greater than anything I've experienced in any of the other temples. The energy throughout was very intense as elsewhere, but that experience was unique for me. As noted, Shiva and his consorts can be viewed as two parts of one divinity. So for example, Hinduism says Shiva and Meenakshi were married. She had a life before she met Shiva. She was a conquering soldier, warrior, in fact. And when she met Shiva, that ended and they became united. So Shiva is also worshipped very prominently in this temple. Then they both have inner sanctums. Interestingly, his shrine is larger than hers and is more central, but hers is definitely considered, from what we were told, the more important of the two. And every night, the priests in a significant ritual take Shiva, his Murti, into Meenakshi's inner sanctum so they can spend the night together. And then he's returned to his own inner sanctum every morning. The temple is amazingly huge, as you can see. As I said, 14 gopurams. I don't think they're all depicted quite here, but as you can see, they're gorgeous, large. The temple complex is very complicated. Here are pictures of the gopurams. Incredible artistry. People often want to know, are those all deities, these forms? Those are not. They're, I'm not sure what all of them are. Protector beings, maybe historical figures, in some cases deity forms, supporters of the deities. And here on the left is a floor plan of the temple. And on the right is the same vantage, the same perspective, but an actual photograph. So in this case, we entered the temple from the north, and you can see my cursor. We came past a structure here, which is called the temple, or excuse me, the Hall of 1,000 Pillars. And I think they're actually 985. We didn't count, we were told that. And then we came down and walked around the tank, and then came to the Meenakshi shrine, and then walked around and came to the Shiva shrine. So here is another detail of these remarkable, just remarkable gopurams. And when you see a golden roof, as you do on the left there, that indicates that it's one of the inner sanctums. So in these temples, the only gold roofs we saw were above the inner sanctums, which are not under the main gopurams, or under the gopurams. Here is the tank. Here's a further detail of the artistry. So this, I presume, on the right where my cursor is, that's Nandi with Shiva and Parvati on top. I don't see some of the typical imagery to associate it with Shiva, but Nandi. Here's a picture of the inside of the temple. Again, it tends to be dark, but very intricate, very colorful. And on the right, we have Meenakshi. She is adorned in emerald green, and she herself, we're told, is emerald green, but she has a face covering here. And she's typically depicted with a parrot on one of her, top of something held in one of her hands. I'm not sure why that is. Here is a picture on the left of the Hall of 1,000 Pillars, and each one of the pillars is uniquely carved. Those pillars are 10, 12 feet tall, I would say. The image on the right is just one of them. That's not the color, that just was the color of the photograph I could find. And that is Murugan, who is, his ride is a peacock. So that shows him straddling a peacock. This was the resort that we stayed in. There were a number of buildings like the one on the left. This is the one I was in. And the picture on the right is the view I had from my room. Then we headed to Rameshwaram. Rameshwaram, some say Rameswaram, is a major pilgrimage destination because it is a crucial location in one of the two main epic stories in Hinduism. The longest of those stories is the Mahabharata, which includes the Bhagavad Gita And that is 10 times longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. The other is the Ramayana. And in that story, Vishnu comes down onto the planet as Rama. Lakshmi, his consort, comes down as Sita. She is kidnapped by a demon and taken to Lanka, which is what we know as Sri Lanka. And the whole very lengthy story is they're finding where she is and then retrieving her with the assistance of a monkey deity named Hanuman, who is a shapeshifter and can fly. And Rameshwaram is the place from which he flew from India over to Sri Lanka to find her, found her, came back and formed the army of monkeys and others with Rama, that she was there. And the monkeys then built, according to the legend, a land bridge to Lanka for the army to be able to get there. Hanuman was an embodiment of Shiva who took that form in order to be of assistance to Rama. Now, there actually is a land bridge just below the surface of the ocean, and Hindus want to believe that it was created by the monkey army. Scientists, though, say it is natural. Maybe it was there before the story was created and it's the source of the legend. Maybe the monkeys built it, I don't know. Anyway, so here we are. You'll see we were on this very narrow peninsula. The town is further in, but we did end up going to the very end of the peninsula, and from there, extending all the way to Sri Lanka, you will see this underwater structure just barely below the surface. Rameshwaram is actually on an island, and so we took this very long causeway to it. They're building an additional structure to make access better because so many people go there. It's a major, as I said, major pilgrimage site. When we reached there, there were a number of the yatris and the other yatras. Again, those are some of the goddess yatris. And on the right is a hotel. That was not our hotel. Our hotel was pretty much like, it was a Western hotel. And we then went out, as you can see from this picture, all the way to the end where you see this icon. When I took the screenshot, we were not quite at the end. We were that close to the water. It was extremely narrow. It then broadens at the end into a gathering place where there were a fair number of people, and people went down into the water. We saw this interesting gentleman. And we went down onto the beach, and there were a great number of Hare Krishna devotees, drumming, chanting, doing the traditional Hare Krishna, Hare Rama chant. A lot of people, including people in our group, participating. And on the right are people gathering around us, some of the yatris. That picture I showed very early on was taken at this location. And then we went to the Rameshwaram temple, and this was a smaller temple, but still really interesting. No photographs were possible because at this temple, we went through a very intense karma clearing ritual, which involved first dunking ourselves 3 times in the ocean, Bay of Bengal, and then being drenched with holy water from each of 22 wells in the temple. It was a lot of water. One of the gopurams is painted an unusual yellow color, which I saw nowhere else. So this is where we dunked ourselves in the water, and there's part of the temple behind it. There's the yellow gopuram. The one on the right, that's actually a different gopuram. It's not just the same one with a different color shown. On the left, this is most of the wells where people were drenched were actually rather small wells. In this case, one of the places people were drenched is that. So the people there are some of the Ayyappan yatris. dressed in black, and the man in white is taking a bucket and dropping it down into the tank and bringing it up and drenching people. So it takes a while for the water to be, brought up and for people to be drenched, but it moved pretty quickly. The temple was very beautiful, not quite as ornate and beautiful as some of the others. So that was then the last place on the tour. The group tour then finished with a travel day. We went back to Madurai, and then I went on my own to the Isha Yoga Center, which was, it was supposed to be a 4-hour drive, and it turned out to be like a 7-hour drive, very harrowing, arriving in the dark, no street lights. And it was about 30 miles west of Coimbatore in the western part of Tamil Nadu, almost into the next state. Isha is a name for Shiva. This ashram is very well known, and the person who established it is very well known, goes by the name Sadhguru, and he remains very active, and he also has an ashram in the United States. I'm pretty sure it's North Carolina. So as we went into this part of the state, it became more mountainous. We're approaching, there's mountains on the western side of India. There's my driver, spoke no English. He had no GPS, and that was interesting. I had GPS, and I tried to show him my phone, and he refused to look at it. He just was going to try to get there by stopping and asking people, and it did not work very well. Anyway, we got there. The Isha Yoga Center is an ashram and also the location of 2 extremely famous shrines, which I've wanted to visit for a number of years. One has been in existence, I think, about 20 years, the other 6 years. That one is a 112-foot tall bust of Shiva, which they claim is the largest bust in the world. And it's Shiva as the Adi Yogi, the original yogi. All yoga is believed to be traced back to Shiva. And then there is a very special, very rare, called the Dhyana Lingam, or Dhyana Linga. So very unusual, as you will see. The ashram is bare bones. I had a room which cost $17.50 a night, and it did not come with soap, towels, blankets. There was a sheet. You could buy them if you needed them, which I didn't need a blanket, but could get a towel and soap. And they served meals with that, but interestingly, no utensils. You're given very liquid things, and you kind of mush it together with other things to be able to eat it. It was an experience. The ashram, as far as I could tell, had hundreds of people, maybe more, but thousands more would come to this site during the day without coming into the ashram part of it, so they could visit these 2 shrines. Photographs were only permitted at the Adi Yogi, so some of the pictures you'll see were stock photos. Virtually everybody I saw there, the thousands and thousands of people, were Indian. Which kind of surprised me, because I think a lot of people know of this site in America, but out of the thousands of people, I tried to keep count, and I think maybe I saw 40 people who were not Indian. Some of them were volunteers working there too, from all around the world. The Adi Yogi was very impressive visually, but I was surprised I didn't feel particularly strong energy there. You'll see in a minute, it is the site of, you won't see all these people, but it's the site of a major all-night Shiva celebration that takes place every year on a particular night, known as Mahashivaratri, celebrated by pretty much all Hindus, I think, anywhere. We have a major celebration here at our temple. And there it is attended by hundreds of thousands of devotees. It goes all night. Some of it's very rich, spiritual. Some of it is music and dancing. So it's kind of Bollywood-like. It's unusual, but it's a really spectacular thing to see. The Dhyana Lingam Linga dome was extremely intense. The energy there, just like in Ramana's caves, I felt. So here is the Adiyogi. Again, that's 112 feet tall. It's metal. If you see it close up, you can see that there are plates of metal that are welded together. Shiva is typically accompanied by a cobra, one or more, that has various symbolisms associated with it. And he has a crescent moon in his hair. Here are a couple other pictures of it, and I draw your attention to the one on the left. Sadhguru is very committed to saving the environment. There are signs all over about saving water and saving plants. And in this particular case, that is a photograph of him on a motorcycle, and the sign says save soil. So, you know, he's really working hard to it. And like some of the other major figures in India, his people do a lot of social welfare work in other locations. He is also just, while we were there, he was actually in Bangalore, where he was dedicating another Adiyogi Murti statue just like this, I'm told. Then these are the grounds, as you know, that's large enough to hold, I would say, 300,000, maybe 500,000 people. In the middle there, you see people who have taken buses and are not in the ashram. They're coming to visit the Adiyogi. And on Mahashivaratri, it's wall-to-wall people covering that entire space. On the right, you're seeing half of the space. There's a similarly sized space on the left behind that structure. Then this is the Dhyana Linga. It is, I believe, 16 feet tall. The yoni, unlike any of the others I've seen anywhere else, is in the shape of a cobra. And the typical way that lingams are handled in worship is they are bathed with water, milk, yogurt, honey, that kind of thing. And some of it then will go out the yoni and into the sewer system, and some will be gathered and shared with people. So in this particular yoni, the liquids would come out of the cobra's mouth and go then into an opening in the floor. At the exterior, you will see there are people seated in cubicles meditating. When we were there, this entire room was full of people meditating, and you could stay as long as you liked, but they try to recycle it every, I think, 10 minutes. There's a bell that rings and chanting. Again, the linga itself, lingam and linga are both correct terms, is very large. And there was a very elaborate consecration process for this entire sanctuary that was done. And the dome above it is, I think, hundreds of thousands of bricks, and they are not supported by any metal structure. They built layer upon layer of bricks, higher and higher, and they built it with sufficient strength just with the bricks that it stays up. And at the top is an opening to allow air to leave, and covered by this this brass. I'm not sure what that's for. Anyway, the energy was really very strong there. So from there, on January 12, I started on a 36-hour transit back to the United States, leaving Chennai. And as you can see in this map, St. Louis now has direct flights from St. Louis to Frankfurt, then Frankfurt to Chennai and back. So at the time when I went, there were all kinds of problems with airplanes on the East Coast, and I flew right over it, no problem. And so then coming back, we left Chennai, and as you can see, if you look at these other maps, it was an interesting route, although I couldn't really see anything. We flew over Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Bulgaria, and then the best I could tell, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, and then into Germany. And then a few hour layover. Again, the whole trip took, I think, 36 hours. It was a lot. Some of it was layovers. And then we ended up, I took a flight from Frankfurt to St. Louis, and people don't really understand how far north that is. We actually flew very close to Iceland, and almost right at the very tip of Greenland. And then that brought me home. And as many of you probably know, on the right, this is our Hindu temple here in St. Louis. As you can see, it is in the Dravidian style. The Gopuram at our Raja Gopuram, which means royal gate, at our temple, it's the only Gopuram we have, is 56 feet tall, I believe. So it's very small by Indian standards, but it is a temple that was designed by a very famous temple architect and temple architectural firm in India. We are very fortunate to have such a beautiful temple. So some final thoughts, and then we'll look at questions, and then have some closing remarks. I found that pilgrimages can definitely change your life. Mine did change. I'm spiritually very different from when I left. I have a greater sense of everything being full of divinity, everything being divine, being immersed in it. And in particular, my heart was greatly opened by the experience with Meenakshi. And to describe that a bit more, because I see we do have still a few minutes, it was like a lightning bolt. She was there and a lightning bolt hit me. I could barely see her, but I could see her eye, and it hit me, and my heart just broke open. And I found myself, I find myself now kind of getting weepy, in fact, with love every time I think about her. I have a more intimate understanding of humanity's diversity, because India is very different from where we live. And the people are very happy, you know, it seems as happy as we are. Everybody has issues, of course. You know, I feel much closer to India. I have an even greater appreciation for India and its people than I did before I left. And I also do have, you know, greater appreciation that we're blessed physically in this country, but seeing what another part of the world looks like and how much richness it offers, this particular part of the world, you know, I find myself wondering, you know, how much do we really need to be happy? So now I will go back out of screen sharing, and I'll take a look at your questions in the Q&A. By my clock, we have 3 minutes. You know, I can, any that I don't get to, if you want to email me at my email, family@livinginsights.com, or just go to my website, Living Insights. I'll try to answer them. Let's see. Why did you have to walk around that temple barefoot? I did not explain that. That's true. When you enter the temples, you do have to be barefoot. In all of them. You leave your shoes outside the temple. Thanks, that was a good addition, I should have mentioned. And we were supposed to be walking just through that, you know, that I don't know what to call it, the cage-like hallway, which, you know, was not rough, but when we ended up leaving that, we ended up deciding to walk around the entire temple, and that was rock and very hot concrete. So, you know, that's the reason. And that frankly, that and going up the mountain were, you know, two of the more physically challenging things. Very often our bus would not be able to get to the temples because it's a large bus, and we would be dropped off and have to walk like as much as a mile or longer to get to a temple. But we would have our shoes for that and wouldn't take off the shoes till we got to the temples. When you say you felt energy some places, not others, what was that feeling like and why was it different? Well, it's if you have felt spiritual energy, you would know it's really hard to describe. I guess there was sort of a tingling to it, like a presence that filled you energetically. You know, maybe you could say, if you can imagine what it would be like to be inside of a microwave, you know, it would be kind of like that. Again, the entire universe, Hindus believe, is consciousness vibrating. So everything is full of energy or vibrations. But when the deity forms, or when people do their spiritual work in a place, time after time, like Ramana Maharshi did for 22 years in these 2 caves, it kind of energizes the space, and you feel like you're walking into a very sacred place. I don't know your religion, Betsy, but if you have gone into one of the sacred places in your faith and you feel elevated, you feel full, you feel bright and energized, it's that kind of thing. Next, what do you know about the new temples being built in further West County? Yes, the Hindu temple on Weidman Road, where I've been active for 15 years now. I represent them in the Interfaith Partnership, and I am one of the main tour guides. Is the only full-blown, I would say, Hindu temple in this region, and in fact in the state. There is a new Ganesha temple that is small. There is a Murugan temple that is being formed, and they have their location. And there is a Durga temple, I understand, that is being discussed, Durga being another one of the consort forms with Shiva. The only full-blown temple, meaning with lots of deities being represented, and the largest by far is the one that's on Weidman Road. Thoughts about South Indian food. I have kind of a sensitive stomach, and I had absolutely no problem with the South Indian food. It was not as spicy as I had expected. And interestingly, I actually am personally a vegan, but it is impossible to be vegan in India. Vegans do not eat dairy products, and Indians cook everything. Well, maybe not everything, but one of their staples is ghee, which is purified butter. So in India, you can be what's called non-veg, which means you're a carnivore, or you can be veg, which means you will allow yourself to have dairy and eggs, or you can be pure veg, which means no eggs, but you can still have dairy. Veganism, nothing you can't find a vegan meal, except when you just force yourself. Is there anything non-Hindus should know before visiting a temple, particularly ones in India? Well, some of the things we've talked about. First of all, you always leave your shoes outside of the sanctuary. In the Hindu temple here, you leave them in the basement. Over there, you leave them outside. There are places that are protected places, and you take off your shoes and you put them in racks. Our guide, we had a native, an Indian guide who always took us places where we knew our shoes would be safe. You will dress appropriately, meaning no shoulders should be shown. Indians are more uptight about shoulders being shown than bellies, because saris typically show a bit of belly. Temples, our temple will not allow you to take pictures inside, and I've already addressed that situation there. One of the other things is very commonly in temples, you are going to see lots of things happening simultaneously. Reason for that is Hindus go to a temple with the goal of having a personal relationship with God. And, you know, you can go to a temple, our temple here has many deity forms represented, and you'll see people with Vishnu in this part of the temple and Shiva in another part of the temple. And, you know, might be 20 people doing one thing and 10 people doing another. And everybody understands that that is not inappropriate. Our temple here, you will hear people talking and doing different things in various parts there. In India, it's pretty noisy everywhere you go. So you will have people moving around constantly. You'll be waiting in lines, at least during this high time that we were there, but I think probably most of the times in the major temples like the ones we went to, you're going to be waiting in line. Temples do not have restrooms inside of them, as far as I know. We always had to, if you had to go to the restroom, you had to leave the temple and come back in. And they do at the temples, you know, some of them, you know, where they don't allow cameras, they will check your bags and make sure you're not taking a phone in. Last question, the Indian population is our #1 largest foreign-born group, and we are working to grow it. In the Mosaic Project. Oh, you're on Mosaic. Good to see you. Yeah, we have. When I became a Hindu at the age of 14, because of an experience that I had, my understanding, and it may be apocryphal, was that there was one Indian family in St. Louis. Swami Nishpapananda from the Vedanta Society here told me there were actually more, but there were very few, and that's because the United States had immigration quotas for countries outside of Europe from, I think it was 1925 to 1965, and the quota for India for the entire United States was 100 people per year. When that was lifted, it started to change. So now you have some communities in the United States with maybe 100,000 or more Indians. In St. Louis, we have something like 18,000 Indians, about say 15,000 of those are Hindus, and it continues to grow. And that's part of why you see the number of temples growing. So those are the questions and answers. We've gone 7 minutes over. Let me take a few minutes to close here. First, again, thank you so much for watching. I do hope it wasn't too long. I said it would take 90 minutes and got pretty close. And I do hope you felt like you went along. I tried to give you not just the religious part, which is a particular interest to people in the Interfaith Partnership and Living Insights, but I know there are probably a number of you interested to know what India is really like and may never get there. And I hope you got some sense of that. If you have appreciated this program, please consider donating to the Interfaith Partnership and/or Living Insights. You can donate through the websites for both of them. You can Google us, but it's interfaithstl.org or livinginsights.com. Finally, Hindus most commonly, as you may know, will greet each other or part saying namaste. And that has been translated in many ways, but it basically means the part of God that is embodied in my form, my physical, my ego, my personality form, recognizes and embodies, and bows to the divinity, the part of God that you embody. And in Tamil Nadu, what I perceive is that they more commonly use a comparable term, namaskaram, for that. So in closing, I'll say thank you so much for being here. I hope it was helpful. If you have more questions or comments, please feel free to email me, and namaskaram. I hope to see you again. Good night.